In 1896, a New Zealand farmer made a strange decision. He transported 400 sheep to a remote, uninhabited island far south in the Pacific, a place of freezing winds, relentless rain, and no trees in sight. The plan was simple: raise the sheep for wool, ship it back to the mainland, and turn a profit. But the project failed almost immediately. The farmer left, abandoning the flock to face a harsh world alone. Years passed, decades turned to silence. The island was forgotten. Then, more than 70 years later, when people finally returned, they were stunned by what they found. The sheep hadn't perished. They had survived. And even more astonishingly, they had changed. Their bodies were larger, their wool thicker, their instincts sharpened by isolation. They had become something else entirely, a living testament to evolution and endurance. This is the story of the Campbell Island sheep, how they endured one of Earth's harshest environments, evolved without human help, and became an unexpected symbol of nature's ability to adapt. Welcome to Mindtrace 360. Before we dive deeper into this astonishing story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It's the simplest way to help this channel grow and bring you more incredible stories like this one. Now let's begin. Campbell Island lies about 600 kilometers south of mainland New Zealand, deep in the sub-Antarctic Ocean. Where it is small, barely 24 kilometers across, but striking, a landscape of sweeping cliffs, bogs, and mist. The average temperature rarely exceeds 10 degrees Celsius. The wind can reach over 100 kilometers an hour, and rain falls nearly 300 days a year. It is the sort of place that looks untouched because it almost is. When sealers first landed in the early 1800s, they called it one of the most desolate places they had ever seen. For most of the 19th century, it remained that way, a refuge for seabirds, sea lions, and albatrosses. But by the 1890s, New Zealand's agricultural frontier was expanding. Wool was the backbone of the economy. The government encouraged settlers to lease unclaimed islands for grazing. The logic was simple. Every new paddock was potential profit. To some, even a sub-Antarctic island looked like opportunity. In 1896, James Gordon, a farmer from Gisborne, obtained a lease for Campbell Island. He envisioned a remote but lucrative sheep station, merino crosses producing dense, high-value wool. He gathered 400 animals, a few laborers, and building supplies, then set sail through some of the roughest waters on the planet. When they arrived, the men faced a place that felt almost alien. There were no trees to cut for shelter, only wet peat and coarse tussock grass. Fog rolled in daily. The wind screamed without pause. Still, Gordon tried to make it work. He built crude huts, released the sheep, and waited for the first shearing season. But reality set in quickly. The animals struggled to graze on the soggy ground. Many starved, their hooves infected by constant moisture. Others died from exposure or simply vanished into the hills. By 1900, the operation was bankrupt. Gordon abandoned the island. He left behind not only the shacks and broken fences, but the surviving sheep, a small remnant of his failed dream. He probably assumed they would die within a year. They didn't. After Gordon's departure, the island was again left to the elements. Occasionally, sealing or whaling ships passed by. Some sailors reported seeing shapes on the slopes, perhaps animals, perhaps just rocks. But in 1907, a new group took an interest, the Campbell Island Pastoral Company. They tried again, sending another flock, mostly Romney and Cheviot breeds, hardy but domestic animals nonetheless. Once more, nature won. Within a decade, the project collapsed, and the island was deserted for good. By 1930, Campbell Island was officially uninhabited. The weather station that operated briefly during the Second World War recorded wind gusts strong enough to overturn trucks. Whatever sheep remained were now completely feral, cut off from humans for generations. And so began one of the most remarkable natural experiments in modern history, one that no scientist planned, but which unfolded in perfect isolation. To understand how the sheep survived, we need to understand the island itself. Campbell Island is a mosaic of bogs and ridges, its ground covered in mosses, ferns, and enormous flowering herbs, plants that look almost tropical but live in freezing air. Food for grazing animals is limited. The grasses are coarse and often waterlogged. Yet, over time, the sheep adapted. Natural selection did what human breeding could not. The weak died, the resilient survived. Over the decades, the flock began to change physically. Their bodies grew larger and heavier, helping them store fat during the long winters. Their wool thickened, forming a natural barrier against wind and rain. They became excellent climbers, navigating cliffs that domestic sheep would never attempt. Their behavior shifted too, more cautious, more alert. They learned to huddle in groups against storms, to find shelter among rocks, and to move constantly in search of food. By the 1950s, estimates suggested around 1,000 feral sheep roamed the island. They were no longer the docile farm animals that had arrived 60 years earlier. They were something new, a wild population shaped entirely by survival. In 1958, the New Zealand Meteorological Service established a manned weather station on Campbell Island. For the first time in half a century, humans returned, and they found the sheep thriving. Scientists were fascinated. These animals had been isolated long enough to diverge genetically from their ancestors. Zoologists began to study their anatomy and physiology. They discovered that the Campbell Island sheep were larger than mainland breeds, with longer legs and more robust skeletons. Their fleece was unusually dense, almost double the thickness of typical merino wool. They also behaved differently, more skittish, more coordinated as a herd, almost like wild deer. It was evolution in action, the kind of natural adaptation usually observed in small species, not livestock. Yet as scientists grew intrigued, conservationists grew concerned. By the 1970s, Campbell Island had become a protected nature reserve, part of New Zealand's subantarctic World Heritage region. Its native vegetation was fragile, evolved without large grazers. The sheep, though remarkable, were destroying it, stripping hillsides bare and threatening endemic plants found nowhere else. The government faced a dilemma: protect the unique ecosystem or preserve this accidental evolutionary experiment. In the end, ecology won. In 1975, an eradication program began. Rangers hunted and removed most of the remaining sheep to allow the island's plants to recover. But a few scientists objected. They argued that the Campbell Island sheep represented something irreplaceable, a living model of adaptation. As a compromise, a small number were captured and relocated to mainland New Zealand, forming what became known as the Campbell Island sheep flock. Every animal in that group traced its lineage back to the feral survivors of the sub-Antarctic. Once on the mainland, researchers studied the rescued sheep extensively. Their genetic makeup confirmed years of isolation. Certain traits, such as body mass and wool structure, had diverged significantly from their parent breeds. Their wool had an exceptionally fine crimp pattern, giving it both insulation and strength. It was unlike commercial merino, thicker yet softer. Their fat reserves and metabolism hinted at an adaptation to near-starvation conditions. Perhaps most fascinating was their behavior. Even after generations in captivity, the descendants of the Campbell Island sheep retained a strong flight response. They preferred rough terrain and reacted nervously to human presence, instincts honed by 70 years of survival without fences. To biologists, they offered a rare case study: how a domestic species, left alone, can evolve toward wildness again. The Campbell Island sheep showed that domestication isn't permanent. Given enough time and pressure, nature reclaims its own. Meanwhile, the island itself began to heal. With the sheep gone, native vegetation slowly returned. Megaherbs like Pleurophyllum speciosum and Anisotomi latifolia began to carpet the hills again. Bird populations increased, albatrosses, petrels, and snipe nesting where grass once was grazed to soil. In the 2000s, New Zealand completed one of the largest rodent eradication projects in the world, removing rats from Campbell Island entirely. Today, it is one of the most pristine ecosystems on Earth, a place where nature has largely reset itself. Yet the story of the sheep remains part of that legacy. They were once an ecological mistake, but also a biological marvel. From a scientific point of view, the Campbell Island sheep are a textbook example of rapid adaptation. In evolutionary terms, 70 years is a blink, but under extreme conditions, change can accelerate. Isolation meant no human selection. Only nature's criteria: endurance, cold resistance, and resourcefulness. Each winter, the weak died. Each spring, the strongest bred. Over dozens of generations, the population shifted toward traits that would never have been favored on a farm: thicker wool, stronger legs, and heightened alertness. It's a form of reverse domestication, evolution working in the opposite direction. Where humans once bred animals for docility and productivity, the environment selected for independence and resilience. This is why the Campbell Island sheep became so valuable to scientists studying adaptation and domestication theory. They bridged two worlds, the human-made and the natural. The story also carries a deeper human meaning. James Gordon's venture was a failure, but unintentionally, he created a living experiment that revealed nature's incredible power to adapt and endure. For decades, no one watched these animals. No one managed their breeding, no one saved them from storms. Yet, they survived, quietly, beyond the edge of civilization. When explorers finally returned, what they found wasn't ruin, but renewal. proof that life can find a way even in desolation. It's easy to see the Campbell Island sheep as a metaphor for resilience itself. Left behind, forgotten, and presumed doomed, they turned isolation into evolution. Today, only a small population of Campbell Island sheep remains in captivity on mainland New Zealand, maintained by dedicated breeders who preserve their lineage as part of the country's agricultural heritage. Looking back, the story feels almost mythic. A farmer's failed venture becomes nature's quiet triumph. On a remote island at the edge of the Southern Ocean, life refused to vanish. It adapted, changed, and endured, until the world came back to find it again. And perhaps that's the lasting lesson of Campbell Island. Even in isolation, even against impossible odds, life is always writing its own story, one of survival, transformation, and the unstoppable force of nature itself.